Mr. President, in the midst of this tragedy, one which you have correctly referred to as a painful awakening, my delegation finds comfort in the warm hospitality of Poland for welcoming us to this very beautiful and charming city of Warsaw, with your people offering us smiles, warm smiles everywhere we go, whether we're in our hotels or on the streets, to the stewards and personnel in this national stadium. So thank you again. Thank you, Poland. The arrangements that you, together with the Secretariat, have made for this COP is most excellent, and we highly appreciate the tremendous effort that you have put into the preparations for this very important meeting. We also thank you, all friends and colleagues gathered in this hall and from all corners of the world, as you stand beside us in this trying time. We thank all countries and governments who have extended your sympathy and for offering your assistance to the Philippines. We thank the youth present here and the billions of young people all over the world who stand steadfast with the Philippines and who are carefully watching us as we craft their future. I thank civil society, both those who are working on the ground as we race against time in the hardest hit areas of the typhoon, and those who are here in Warsaw, prodding us to have a sense of urgency. We thank the media as well for helping us communicate the realities of climate change. We are deeply moved by this manifestation of human solidarity, and we likewise stand in solidarity with all countries that face and confront the adverse impacts of climate change. This outpouring of support proves that as a human race, we can unite and we can all rise above adversity, that as a species, we care. Mr. President, it was barely 11 months ago in Doha when my delegation made an appeal to the world to open our eyes to the stark realities that we face. As then we confronted a catastrophic storm that resulted in the costliest disaster in Philippine history. Less than a year hence, we cannot imagine that a disaster much bigger would come. With an apparent cruel twist of fate, my country is being tested by this hailstorm called Super Typhoon Haiyan. It was so strong that if there was a Category 6, it would have fallen squarely in that box. And up to this hour, Mr. President, we remain uncertain as to the full extent of the damage and devastation as information trickles in agonizingly slow manner because power lines and communication lines have been cut off and may take a while before they are restored. The initial assessment showed that Haiyan left a wake of massive destruction that is unprecedented, unthinkable, and horrific. According to the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, Haiyan was estimated to have attained sustained winds of 315 kilometers per hour, that's equivalent to 195 miles per hour, and gusts up to 378 kilometers per hour, making it the strongest typhoon in modern recorded history. And despite the massive efforts that my country had exerted in preparing for the onset of this storm, it was just a force too powerful, and even as a nation familiar with storms, Haiyan was nothing we have ever experienced before. Mr. President, the picture in the aftermath is ever slowly coming into clearer focus. The devastation is colossal. And as if this is not enough, another storm is brewing again in the warm waters of the Western Pacific. I shudder at the thought of another typhoon hitting the same places where people have not yet even managed to begin standing up. To anyone outside who continues to deny and ignore the reality that is climate change, I dare them to get off their ivory towers and away from the comfort of their armchairs. I dare them to go to the islands of the Pacific, the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean, and see the impacts of rising sea levels, to the mountainous regions of the Himalayas and the Andes, to see communities confronting glacial floods, to the Arctic where communities grapple with the fast-dwindling sea ice sheets, the large deltas of the Mekong, the Ganges, the Amazon, the Nile, where lives and livelihoods are drowned, to the hills of Central America that confront similar monstrous hurricanes, to the vast savannas of Africa where climate change has likewise become a matter of life and death as food and water become scarce. Not to forget the monster storms in the Gulf of Mexico and the eastern seaboard of North America, as well as the fires that have raged down under. And if that is not enough, they may want to see what has happened to the Philippines now. Mr. President, I need not elaborate on the science, as Dr. Pachauri has done that already for us. But it tells us simply that climate change will mean increased potential for more intense tropical storms. And this will have profound implications on many of our communities, especially those who struggle against the twin challenges of the development crisis and the climate crisis. And typhoons such as Haiyan and its impacts represent a sobering reminder to the international community that we cannot afford to delay climate action. Warsaw must deliver on enhancing ambition and should muster the political will to address climate change and build that important bridge towards Peru and Paris. It might be said that it must be poetic justice that the typhoon Haiyan was so big that its diameter spanned the distance between Warsaw and Paris. Mr. President, in Doha, we asked, if not us, then who? If not now, then when? If not here, then where? But here, in Warsaw, we may very well ask these same forthright questions. What my country is going through as a result of this extreme climate event is madness. The climate crisis is madness. Mr. President, we can stop this madness right here in Warsaw. It is the 19th COP, but we might as well stop counting because my country refuses to accept that a COP30 or a COP40 will be needed to solve climate change. And because it seems that despite the significant gains we have had since the UNFCCC was born, 20 years hence, we continue to fall short in fulfilling the ultimate objective of the convention. Now we find ourselves in a situation where we have to ask ourselves, can we ever attain the ultimate objective of the convention, which is to prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system? By failing to meet the objective of the convention, we may have ratified our own doom. And if we have failed to meet the objective of the convention, we have to confront the issue of loss and damage. Loss and damage is a reality today across the world. And developed country emissions reductions targets are dangerously low and must be raised immediately, but even if these were in line with the demand of reducing 40 to 50% below 1990 levels, we will still have locked in climate change, and we still would need to address the issue of loss and damage. Mr. President, I beg your indulgence as I continue this statement. We find ourselves at a critical juncture, and the situation is that even the most ambitious emissions reductions by developed countries who should have been taking the lead in the last 2 decades will not be enough to avert the climate crisis. It is now too late to talk about the world being able to rely on Annex I countries to solve the climate crisis. We have entered a new era that demands global solidarity in order to fight climate change and ensure that the pursuit of sustainable human development remains at the fore of the global community's efforts. This is why the means of implementation for developing countries becomes ever so crucial. We cannot sit and stay helpless staring at this international climate stalemate. It is now time to raise ambition and take action. We need an emergency climate pathway. Mr. President, I speak for my delegation, but I speak for the countless people who will no longer be able to speak for themselves after perishing from the storm. I speak also for those who have been orphaned by the storm. I speak for those who have the people now raising its time to save survivors and alleviate the suffering of the people affected. We can take drastic action now to ensure that we prevent a future where super typhoons become a way of life. Because we refuse as a nation to accept a future where super typhoons like Haiyan become a way of life. We refuse to accept that running away from storms, evacuating our families, suffering the devastation and misery, counting our dead become a way of life. We simply refuse to. Mr. President, even in the context of the obvious imperative for adaptation, my country does not come with empty hands. The Philippines had enacted a renewable energy law, which mandates the establishment of feed-in tariffs for renewable energy, with the aspiration of doubling our renewable energy capacity by 2020 and tripling it by the year 2030, pursuant to our National Renewable Energy Program. Now, as has become very clear, the Philippines grapples with serious challenges in the face of climate impacts. It may be unreasonable to ask the ordinary Filipino to bear the burden of increased power rates because of feed-in tariffs until renewables reach grid parity. I challenge our friends, our partners from developed countries to finance this incremental cost of the portion of the Philippine feed-in tariff that would otherwise be paid for by the impoverished electricity consumer, and only until renewables reach grid parity with fossil fuel or conventional fuels. We call this our socialized feed-in tariff. By our estimate, it is only in the neighborhood of $500 million. We estimate also that renewables will reach grid parity by 2020. If developed countries would finance this cost, we can triple our renewable energy capacity by 2030. If developed countries will gladly come forward to provide the resources for this, we will be ready to inscribe this as our nationally appropriate mitigation action. Because we believe in renewables, we believe in sustainable development, and because we believe that solving climate change is our moral duty. This moral duty is applicable to all parties. Now, Mr. President, if you will allow me, I wish to speak on a more personal note. Super Typhoon Haiyan, perhaps unknown to many here, made landfall in my own family's hometown. And the devastation is staggering. I struggle to find words even for the images that we see on the news coverage. And I struggle to find words to describe how I feel about the losses. Up to this hour, I agonize, waiting for word to the fate of my very own relatives. What gives me renewed strength and great relief is that my own brother has communicated to us and he had survived the onslaught. In the last 2 days, he has been gathering bodies of the dead with his own 2 hands. He is very hungry and weary as food supplies find it difficult to arrive in that hardest hit area. Mr. President, these last 2 days, there are moments when I feel that I should rally behind climate advocates who peacefully confront those historically responsible for the current state of our climate. These selfless people who fight coal, expose themselves to freezing temperatures, or block oil pipelines. In fact, we are seeing increasing frustration and thus more increased civil disobedience. The next 2 weeks, these people and many around the world who serve as our conscience will again remind us of this enormous responsibility. To the youth here who constantly remind us that their future is in peril, to the climate heroes who risk their lives, reputation, personal liberties to stop drilling in polar regions, and to those communities standing up to unsustainable and climate-disrupting sources of energy, we stand with them. We cannot solve problems at the same level of awareness that created them, as Dr. Pachari alluded to Einstein earlier. We cannot solve climate change when we seek to spew more emissions. Mr. President, and I express this with all sincerity, in solidarity with my countrymen who are struggling to find food back home, and with my brother who has not had food for the last 3 days, with all due respect, Mr. President, and I mean no disrespect for your kind hospitality, I will now commence a voluntary fasting for the climate. This means I will voluntarily refrain from eating food during this COP until a meaningful outcome is in sight, until concrete pledges have been made to ensure mobilization of resources for the Green Climate Fund. We cannot afford a 4th COP with an empty GCF, until the promise of the operationalization of a loss and damage mechanism has been fulfilled, until there is assurance on finance for adaptation, until we see real ambition on climate action in accordance with the principles we have so upheld. Mr. President, This process under the UNFCCC has been called many, many names. It has been called a farce. It has been called an annual carbon-intensive gathering of useless frequent flyers. It has been called many names, and this hurts. But we can prove them wrong. The UNFCCC can also be called the project to save the planet. It has also been called Saving Tomorrow Today a couple of years ago. And today we say, I care. We can fix this. We can stop this madness right now, right here, in the middle of this football field, and stop moving the goalposts. Mr. President, Your Excellency, Honorable Minister, my delegation calls on you most respectfully to lead us and let Poland and Warsaw be remembered forever as the place where we truly cared to stop this madness. If this is our imperative here in Warsaw, you can rely on my delegation. Now, can humanity rise to this occasion? Mr. President, I still believe we can. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippines, for your great speech. I will invite now Nauru to make a statement. Thank you.